No Trey Harris, no Henry Parrish. Jackson Dart needed to leave the game for at least a series, and yet and still Ole Miss pulls off the upset of the number 3 ranked Georgia Bulldogs, handing the Bulldogs their second loss this season, and really upsetting the college football playoff picture in a way that is awesome to talk about, because now we have 2 of the top 4 teams in the country all taking losses today. Miami, no longer undefeated. They dropped one to unranked Georgia Tech. Miami felt like the kind of program that was on borrowed time, that they had probably talked themselves out of, played themselves out of 5 losses, weren't able to do that against Georgia Tech. Meanwhile, Georgia has been Jekyll and Hyde, man. They looked unstoppable against Texas defensively. Offensively, we'd seen some cracks in what Carson Beck is. There were lots of folks that going into the season believed that Carson Beck was a top 10 player, top 10 pick, a Heisman Trophy candidate. He has looked anything but in the last 6 games. He's thrown interceptions in every single one of the last 6. He's had multiple interceptions in 5 of the last 6. And against Ole Miss, who was rushing 3 most of the time, they were just getting hands in the air, and they were still getting home. You could see the roster that they had paid so much for at Ole Miss was coming through. Jared Ivey having a game. Centering Perkins having a game. You keep going down the line on this one. They showed up, and I think what's more important here is they showed up without their full complement of players. Like, I don't mind saying it. Trey Harris is one of the best Trey Harris is one of the best wide receivers in the entire country. And since transferring in from La Tech, he's purported himself to be nothing but. Like, it's Trey Harris, it's Luther Burden, it's Ryan Williams, it's Jeremiah Smith. You keep going down there. But Jordan Watkins showed up in a huge way against Arkansas. And while it was embarrassing for Arkansas to take that 63-21 loss, you're looking at this game and you're seeing not only were they able to throw for nearly 300 yards against Georgia with 2 different quarterbacks, and one guy comes off the bench just throwing strikes, my God. But you could do this with Ulysses Bentley IV and with a well-traveled tailback out of Clemson. Georgia State ends up at Ole Miss and is in the big spot to secure a victory in the 4-minute offense. I am quite literally over the moon about how this is turning out in the SEC, because it looks like anybody could win it with LSU, Alabama still on top. Indiana playing with fire as this game was winding down, 17-15 up against Michigan. Remember, Indiana had beaten every single team it played up until now by 14 points or more, and they've been putting up 40. And the Michigan defense said, not today. We're coming into Bloomington, and we're going to give you the what, for, and how now. We're not going to be no Nebraska. You're not going to jump on us and beat us up 56-7. While Ole Miss and Georgia looking at this thing going, oh my God, what's going on over there? And then Colorado up 11 as this thing is folding up. Iowa State getting beat by Kansas means that Colorado's got a sure path where they control their own destiny in the Big 12 championship. This means we can look from 1 to 25 now in the current college football playoff rankings, and we can make a case for every single one of these teams to get into the playoff right now. We're not, because 2 of those spots are taken, right? Oregon, right? Right now, BYU, what we think. We'll see about the BYU-Utah. They're both undefeated, right? They're both Power 4 conference. They're presumptive Power 4 conference champions. But if Oregon and BYU somehow take a loss, we're talking about really going into blows coming the last 3 weeks of this thing. But real quick, how was Ole Miss able to beat Georgia? Quite frankly, they were able to do something nobody gets to do against Georgia. They went with explosive plays. They got explosive runs. They got explosive passes. They had they had 8 plays at least. I think it was 10, but it's 8 plays at least plays of 20 yards or more. I just don't see Georgia's defense doing that. And I got to ask it, man, what is it that Ole Miss was able to do against Georgia that Texas wasn't, right? Because you look at the Texas offense, and it's at least on par with what Ole Miss has shown itself capable of. There's also an Ole Miss team that lost to Kentucky, who, my God, might be good. Lost to LSU, who lost to USC, who is not good. And LSU is going to have an opportunity to prove that they are good, we think, against an Alabama team that lost to Vanderbilt as the number 1 team. Vanderbilt is one of the better stories in all of college football. Meanwhile, we're talking about Indiana was trying to make history when securing its first 10-win season, and they are scratching clawing at the end of this thing, while Ole Miss had its back against the wall and had its back against the wall basically since taking that loss to LSU. They can't afford another loss and expect to make the college football playoff. But now, 2 losses to Georgia, 2 losses to Ole Miss. Ole Miss has the head-to-head against Georgia. If you're talking about the 12 best teams, how are you going to put Georgia in over Ole Miss? You're not. Like, the results are right here. If you're talking about the 12 best teams, how are you going to put Georgia, take Georgia out of this thing when they're the only team to beat Texas? And Texas has a road now to playing in the friggin' SEC championship. Like, this is wild. I am so excited about this. I mean, I didn't expect 25-10 to get me up out of my chair. You know what I'm saying? But 25-10 gets me up out of my chair. And I'm going, oh my God. Now we get to talk about Jackson Dart making money moves. Like, that dude was on a bum ankle picking up first downs against really what was a busted pass play, or your busted rush, because you left a lane for him to run through, and he just did, right? Lane Kiffin continued to dial them up against this Georgia defense, and Glenn Schumann having nothing. Like, that was really, I didn't expect any of that. You know, all I keep hearing from Georgia fans is who they didn't have, right, as they're playing these football games, especially last week, right? Now, I'm looking at this and look at who Ole Miss didn't have. The most prolific wide receiver in the country when he's on the field, Henry Parrish, who is proven to be one of the better tailbacks in this thing. And then you're asking Jackson Dart to go to the locker room, come back, and then you get Simmons coming in there throwing darts. They answered some questions today, Ole Miss did. And after putting together their best ever season last year with 11 wins, first time in history, they look like a college football playoff team today. But can that hold? Like, that's what we're up against. That's what's going to be interesting. Georgia still got to play Tennessee, by the way. And Tennessee going to look at this tape and go, ooh, we might have us something here. But as I'm looking at this, I'm also asking the question, like, dead ass, what are they going to do about Carson Beck? Because Kirby had been loud about Carson gives us the best chance to win. There are games where we got to throw the football, and we got to throw the football well to win football games. And Carson gives us the best opportunity to do that. Are you still sure about that? Is the question that many Georgia fans are going to ask. Because going into this thing, Beck felt like the weak link. If you don't win a national championship, it felt like it was going to be him. And this one is hard to say because Ole Miss was doing what it wanted to offensively, and they're able to pick up these chunk plays where it looked like every play that Lane Kiffin drew up, man, was ready to go for 6. And they just couldn't get it done. They couldn't stop Ole Miss from doing what Ole Miss was already going to do. I'm excited. I am. If you can see it in my face, I'm going, ooh, we going to be talking about this SEC championship right up into the wire. And this first time that we've had 16 friggin' teams in the SEC. Oh my gosh. Guys, do you realize we could end up with like A&M in a championship game? Do you realize that? We get up with Ole Miss in a championship game? We end up with Texas in a championship game. Do you know that there's been no new member to the SEC to make the SEC championship game since it became a championship game in 1990? Like, what are we living in? The best of times. That's what we're living in. I'm excited about this. Congratulations to Ole Miss pulling off this upset. And for, frankly, making the next 3 weeks must-see football.